Hello, I'm Yante, and this is a film review of Default. A more direct translation of the official Korean title is National Bankruptcy Day. Unlike what the title might suggest, the film is actually about the day that South Korea narrowly avoided sovereign default in November of 1997 by seeking official assistance from the International Monetary Fund, better known as the IMF. South Korea never actually went bankrupt. Released in 2018, this film also happens to be the first and only theatrical film specifically about this event to date. This historical drama was directed by Choi Guk-hee, and the story revolves predominantly around 5 key characters. Kim Hye-soo plays as Han Shi-hyun, the head of the monetary policy team at Bank of Korea. She was the first to foresee the national bankruptcy crisis and was subsequently assigned into the task force. She believed that getting help from IMF was not the best solution. Instead, she believed that South Korea should retain complete control over its own domestic affairs. This caused a lot of friction between her and the high-ranking government officials. Cho Jin plays as the Deputy Minister of Finance of South Korea. In stark contrast with Han Shi-hyun, he believes that it is best to resolve the bankruptcy quickly through negotiations with IMF. As a person who uses the national bankruptcy as an opportunity to create a world centered around the wealthy, he confronts Han Shi-hyun over how to respond to the economic crisis. Yoo Hyun plays as Yoon Jung-ha, an ambitious finance analyst who, like Han Shi-hyun, also sees the looming national bankruptcy. He makes a huge gamble by resigning from his stable job and turning the crisis into a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, where he finds a way to make a big profit as others go bankrupt. Vincent Castle plays as the managing director of IMF. He participates in the negotiations, pressuring the South Korean government with unreasonable conditions even before negotiations for bailout loans even begins. Ho Jun-ho plays as Han Gap-soo, an ordinary head of a household and president of a bull factory. Before the crisis and the intervention from IMF, he was an ordinary middle-class person, but after a bill transaction with Midopa is on the verge of bankruptcy, and the economic crisis threatens his entire livelihood. Although the film was based on a real economic crisis, it is largely a work of fiction that is historically inaccurate. By reducing the story to such a one-dimensional good versus evil narrative, the film inevitably distorted the events that actually happened. In the film, it appears that government officials were active in the IMF negotiations and almost handed over economic sovereignty to the IMF. This is very different from what really happened. At that time, the Bank of Korea first proposed to apply for an IMF bailout. While the government acknowledged the need for a bailout, but tried to block the IMF as much as possible by finding alternative solutions, such as requesting economic aid from foreign countries like Japan, or through domestically handled measures such as asset-backed securities. Furthermore, the economic system of any country is very complex, so there definitely wasn't a single cause for South Korea's financial crisis. One trigger was the weakening of the Japanese yen, which dried up the flow of direct investments from Japan to South Korea and strained the country's foreign exchange reserves. Another significant trigger was a series of bankruptcies of large corporations like Hanbo, Sammy, Jinro, and others, caused in part by the government not intervening with financial bailouts and the inherent fault of a government-led industrialization in the chaebol system. A third trigger was foreign creditors like American and Japanese banks refusing to roll over their loans to Korean financial institutions due to Hong Kong experiencing financial difficulty at the time. There are probably a lot more triggers that I have not listed here. Needless to say, the greed of a single person of high socioeconomic standing cannot be blamed for the crisis as the film tries to suggest. In my opinion, the IMF was wrongfully portrayed in a negative light in the film because the organization itself is an international philanthropic program designed to stabilize the global economy. The IMF kept its word and helped South Korea get out of the crisis in the following decades, and even announced that South Korea's financial system didn't need its help in 2019, a year after the release of this film. Currently, several measures have been put in place to prevent, or at the very least reduce the likelihood of, another financial crisis from happening again. These measures include the strengthening of legal and regulatory infrastructure, the rehabilitation of financial institutions, the strengthening of prudent regulations, the reduction of moral hazard, the promotion of capital account liberalization, and the strengthening of corporate governance of financial institutions. I don't pretend to understand how these measures actually work, but it's comforting to know that they are there and that the South Korean economy is more functional because of them. Thank you for watching. This was a film review of Default.